welcome to this deep dive. We're going to be kind of dissecting the world of the TNF superfamily.
Yeah.
And its role in deciding whether cells live or die.
You know, it's fascinating just how these molecules can be the signal for life, but also the signal for death.
Yeah, it's like a cellular Game of Thrones out there, right?
Absolutely.
And you've given us some really interesting research on this.
Yeah.
I'm really kind of fascinated to get into the specifics, but maybe we can start with the basics.
Sure.
Like, what is this TNF superfamily?
Well, the TNF superfamily, basically, it's a group of signaling molecules. So these molecules, they hang out on the surfaces of cells.
Okay.
And they interact with very specific receptors. And these receptors are called, surprise, surprise, TNF receptors.
Makes sense.
So these interactions are like a cascade. They start a whole chain of events inside the cell, and these events ultimately decide whether the cell lives or dies.
So it's kind of like a cellular communication network, right?
Absolutely.
Where TNF molecules are the messengers and the receptors are like the receivers.
Yeah, like a molecular telegram, you know?
Got it. And I guess the message depends on like which TNF molecule and which receptor we're talking about.
Exactly. So there are some TNF receptor subtypes. So subtypes are like variations within the TNF receptor family.
Yeah.
So for example, CD40.
Okay.
So CD40 is primarily involved in cell survival pathways.
Oh?
So when CD40 is activated, it can actually stimulate cell growth and proliferation.
So it's like a green light telling the cells, okay, go ahead, grow, drive.
Exactly.
You got it. Okay, cool. But I know from our notes that there are other TNF receptor subtypes like fans.
Right.
And that one's a little bit more sinister, shall we say.
Well, it has a nickname.
Uh-huh.
And the nickname is the death receptor.
Okay.
And as the name suggests, when FANS is activated, it can actually trigger a cascade of events that lead to a very specific type of cell death called apoptosis.
Apoptosis.
Yeah.
So that's like the cell's self-destruct button.
That's a great way to put it. Yep.
But I guess my question is like, why would a cell even want to self-destruct?
Well, you know, it seems kind of counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
But apoptosis is actually really important. It's a very important process for maintaining a healthy organism because it basically gets rid of cells that are maybe old, damaged, or, you know, potentially harmful, making space for new healthy cells. So think of it like pruning a garden.
Okay.
You remove the dead or the weak branches to allow for healthier growth. Right. So it's the same idea with apoptosis. You're getting rid of the unwanted cells to allow for a healthier cellular population.
I see. It's all about maintaining that balance, right? Have the right signals at the right time.
Absolutely.
And I guess those signals can get pretty complex.
Yeah, it's not a simple process. There's a whole cast of characters inside the cell that are involved.
Okay.
You've got adapter proteins, enzymes like caspases, and then signaling pathways like NFP, you know, and they all play a role in whether a cell survives or undergoes apoptosis.
So, and this is what I was thinking about as I was reading the notes you sent. How do those signals kind of diverge, right?
Right.
How does a cell know whether to activate something like NFP, which I know is usually involved in survival,
Yes.
versus activating caspases, which you said were like the executioners of apoptosis?
That is a great question. And that's where things get really, really interesting because the balance between those pathways, it often depends on specific adapter proteins that are recruited to the TNF receptor complex.
Okay, so the adapter proteins, they're like the middlemen, right?
Exactly.
You connect the receptor to these downstream pathways.
They're like the couriers
Okay.
delivering the message, so to speak.
But they can be pretty selective, right? Some of them will activate caspases, and then that will set off the apoptosis cascade.
Yeah.
But others will activate NFP, and then that promotes survival.
Exactly, exactly. So they're like the traffic controllers of the cell.
Oh.
They're directing the flow of signals down different pathways, and that's how a cell knows whether to survive or to die.
I see. So we've got these like TNF molecules, we've got receptors, we've got adapter proteins, and they're all working together to control whether a cell lives or dies.
Right?
And I know from the notes that this is all tied into inflammation and autoimmune diseases. So how does that work?
So inflammation, it's basically the body's way of responding to injury or infection, right?
Yeah.
It's a complex process. It involves all sorts of cells and signaling molecules. And you guessed it, TNF superfamily members play a key role.
Got it.
In fact, TNF actually stands for tumor necrosis factor.
Ooh.
And that kind of hints at its historical association with inflammation.
I see. So TNF molecules are like the alarm bells.
Yes.
They alert the immune system to danger.
They say, hey, something's wrong here. We need to take action.
Got it. But if inflammation is supposed to be a good thing, like a protective response, how does it become a problem?
Well, that's a great question, and that's where things get a little bit tricky, right? Because while inflammation is essential for fighting off threats, it can become a problem when it's chronic or when it's misdirected.
Ah, so it's like having the smoke detector going off all the time, even when there's no fire.
You got it. It's more of a nuisance than a helpful warning at that point, right?
Right, exactly.
So in autoimmune diseases, the immune system mistakenly attacks the body's own tissues.
Yeah.
And this leads to chronic inflammation and tissue damage. And, as you might have guessed, TNF superfamily members are often implicated in this process.
So these TNF molecules, they can be heroes and villains, I guess, depending on the situation.
Absolutely. Context is everything.
Right, and that's where our notes mention therapies that actually target these pathways, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that?
So scientists are actually developing therapies that target TNF superfamily members to try and modulate the immune response and treat a variety of diseases, including those pesky autoimmune disorders that we were talking about.
So it's kind of like fine-tuning the body's alarm system, right? So it responds appropriately.
Yeah. We want to make sure that it's responding to real threats and not causing harm by overreacting.
This has been really interesting. So just from this basic overview of the TNF superfamily, we can see how it orchestrates this complex dance between cell survival and death, and it has really important implications for human health.
It really is a delicate balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the more we understand about these pathways, the more opportunities we'll have to develop targeted therapies for a wide range of diseases.
And we're going to be talking more about that in the next part of this deep dive.
Absolutely. We'll delve even deeper into the specifics.
Looking forward to it.
Me too. So now we've kind of laid the groundwork, right, for understanding this TNF superfamily. I think it's time to really kind of zoom in on how these signals actually work at the molecular level.
Okay, let's get into the nitty-gritty.
Yeah. So the notes you gave me focus on a couple of key members of the TNF receptor superfamily, like CD40 and Fas, and I think that's a great place to start.
Perfect. We already kind of touched on CD40 as being that pro-survival signal.
Yeah.
But how does it actually, what are the specifics of how it promotes cell survival?
So one of the really cool things about CD40 is that it can activate a bunch of downstream signaling pathways.
Okay.
And one of the most important ones is the NFB pathway.
NFB, we've talked about that before.
We have.
It's like the master regulator of inflammation and the immune response.
Exactly. And in the context of CD40 signaling, NFB can actually lead to the expression of genes that promote cell survival, proliferation, and even differentiation.
Wow. Okay, so it's like CD40 through NFB is giving the cell this boost, helping it to thrive and even specialize into different cell types.
You got it. That's a great way to put it.
Cool. But then we've also got FAS.
Right, which is the death receptor.
Yes.
So how does that contrast with CD40 at the molecular level?
Okay, so FAS, unlike CD40, it primarily triggers the activation of caspases.
Right.
Those enzymes we talked about earlier, the executioners of apoptosis.
Yeah.
So when FAS is activated by its ligand, it recruits these adapter proteins.
Okay.
And they assemble this thing called a death-inducing signaling complex, or DIC.
DISC.
I know, it sounds kind of ominous, right?
A little bit, yeah.
So the DISC basically acts as a platform for activating caspase 8.
Okay.
Which is what we call an initiator caspase.
So it's like the first domino.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Caspase 8, once it's activated, it can then activate downstream executioner caspases.
Oh, wow.
Which then go on to dismantle the cell from within, leading to apoptosis.
It's amazing how these two different TNF receptor subtypes can trigger these completely distinct pathways and lead to opposite outcomes for the cell.
It really highlights just the incredible specificity of cellular signaling, right?
Yeah. The fate of a cell really can depend on which receptor is activated and which pathways are then engaged.
That makes me think about the adapter proteins that we talked about earlier. They seem like they're really critical.
They are.
In directing the flow of these signals.
Yeah.
Are there specific adapter proteins involved with CD40 and Fas signaling?
Absolutely. So in the case of CD40, one of the key adapter proteins is called TREF2.
TREF2.
And so TREF2, when it's recruited to the activated CD40 receptor, it can activate several downstream signaling pathways, including NF-κ, which contributes to CD40's pro-survival effect.
So it's like TREF2 is like CD40's wingman, helping it to keep those cells alive.
That's a great way to put it. And then in the case of Fas, a really important adapter protein is FADD.
FADD, does that stand for something like
oh, it does.
Fas-associated death domain?
You got it. FADD, it's a key player in Fas-mediated apoptosis. It's recruited to that activated Fas receptor, and it helps to assemble the DISC, leading to the activation of caspase-8 and the execution of apoptosis.
So TREF2 and FADD are like two sides of the same coin, really.
They are.
One's promoting survival, the other one's driving cell death.
Right. And the balance between these two opposing forces is really critical for human health.
You mentioned earlier that TNF signaling is involved in inflammation. So where do CD40 and Fas fit into that?
So they both influence inflammation, but in kind of different ways. So CD40, through the activation of NF-κ, can actually promote the production of these things called pro-inflammatory cytokines. These are signaling molecules that amplify the immune response.
So CD40 can contribute to that inflammatory storm that we need to fight off infections.
That's exactly right. But it's important to remember that CD40 signaling can also have anti-inflammatory effects in certain contexts.
Oh, interesting.
It's a complex player with multiple roles in immune regulation.
And what about Fas? How does it contribute to inflammation?
So Fas, because it can induce apoptosis, can actually help to resolve inflammation by eliminating activated immune cells that have kind of served their purpose.
Okay, so it's like the cleanup crew.
Exactly.
Making sure that the inflammatory response doesn't get out of control.
You got it. But similar to CD40, Fas signaling can also contribute to inflammation in certain situations, particularly in autoimmune diseases.
Oh, right.
We were talking about how dysregulated TNF signaling can contribute to autoimmune diseases.
Yeah.
Can you remind me what that is again?
Well, in autoimmune diseases, the immune system attacks the body's own tissues.
Right.
And a lot of times that's mediated by immune cells that express FAS-L. Which is the ligand for Fas. So these Fas cell expressing immune cells are basically going rogue.
Yeah.
And they're targeting healthy tissues.
That's one way to put it. And that can lead to chronic inflammation and tissue damage.
Right.
As seen in diseases like rheumatoid arthritis or multiple sclerosis.
Wow, it's amazing how these signaling pathways that are so essential for normal immune function can go haywire and contribute to disease.
It is, and that's why researchers are really interested in developing therapies that can target these pathways, either to, dampen that excessive inflammation or enhance immune responses when it's needed.
You mentioned earlier that there are therapies that target TNF superfamily members.
Right.
Can you give us some examples?
Sure. One example is the use of anti-TNF biologics. These are antibodies that block the activity of TNF-alpha, a key inflammatory cytokine. So these biologics have been revolutionary for treating diseases like rheumatoid arthritis and other autoimmune diseases.
So they're like molecular shields, right?
They prevent TNF-alpha from binding to its receptors and triggering inflammation.
I see.
And another strategy that researchers are looking at is developing agonists or antagonists of specific TNF receptor subtypes like CD40 or Fas.
So agonists and antagonists, they're either mimicking or blocking the activity of those receptors.
Yeah, you got it. For example, researchers are exploring the use of CD40 agonists to boost immune responses against cancer. While Fas antagonists are being investigated as potential therapies for autoimmune diseases.
It's incredible how scientists are harnessing the power of these pathways to develop new ways to fight disease.
It's really remarkable, and it just highlights how important it is to understand the intricacies of these pathways in both health and disease.
It's amazing how they're using that knowledge to develop therapies.
Right.
We've been talking a lot about CD40 and Fas.
Yeah.
But I know there's a whole family
of
these TNF receptors.
As a big family.
So is it kind of like each member of the family's got their own personality and role to play?
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it. And like any family, right? Some members are maybe a little more well-known than others.
Right. And I guess understanding those individual roles is going to be key.
Absolutely, especially for developing those targeted therapies.
So can you give us some examples of some other TNF receptors.
Sure. So one example is TNF receptor 1, or TNFR1 for short.
TNFR1. Okay.
And that's probably the most, I guess, famous member of the family.
Yeah, that one rings a bell.
And it's the primary receptor for TNF alpha.
Ah, okay, right, which is that potent inflammatory cytokine we were talking about.
Exactly. So when TNF alpha binds to TNFR1, it can trigger a whole bunch of responses, including inflammation, cell survival, and even cell death.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a busy receptor.
That is, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
So TNFR1 can kind of activate multiple different pathways.
It can. It depends.
Depending on, like, the context?
The context, the cell type, all sorts of factors.
Are there any other TNF receptors that are particularly, like, intriguing to researchers right now?
Yeah, there are a bunch, but one that comes to mind is TRAIL-R1, also known as DR4.
TRAIL-R1, DR4, what do those stand for?
So TRAIL stands for TNF-related apoptosis-inducing ligand.
Okay.
And DR4 stands for death receptor 4.
Oh, so it's another death receptor, like Fas.
It is. So when TRAIL-R1 is activated by its ligand, TRAIL, it can trigger apoptosis, similar to Fas.
But why have another death receptor?
Right. That's a great question.
What's special about this one?
Well, one of the really interesting things about TRAIL-R1 is that it seems to preferentially induce apoptosis in cancer cells.
Oh, wow.
While sparing normal cells.
Whoa. So it's like a targeted assassin for cancer cells.
That's the idea. And so, researchers are really interested in that, and they're exploring the potential of using TRAIL and TRAIL-R1 agonists as cancer therapies.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
So we've covered so much today, from the basics of this TNF signaling to these different receptor subtypes and how they're involved in inflammation, apoptosis, even cancer. I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed, to be honest.
It's a lot.
Yeah. What are some, like, key takeaways?
Okay, so key takeaways. I think one of the most important things to remember is that the TNF superfamily, it's a really complex group of signaling molecules.
Right.
And they play these, like, crucial roles in a ton of different biological processes.
Yeah, it's not just inflammation or cell death. It's so much more.
Exactly. It's immune regulation, tissue development, it's all connected.
And I think another important point is that the outcome of that TNF signaling can really vary. Depending on which receptor is activated.
Exactly.
Like the cell type, the context.
Of other signaling molecules, there's so much going on.
Yeah, it's like a web.
It is.
Of all these different interactions. It's complex.
And that makes it a challenging but exciting area of research.
Well, for me, one of the things that really stood out is just how tightly regulated these pathways are.
Yeah.
It's like this delicate balancing act.
It is.
Between those pro-survival signals and the pro-death signals. And when that balance is disrupted, that's when you run into problems.
Exactly. It's all about maintaining that balance.
Right. So understanding those regulatory mechanisms is going to be key for developing therapies.
It is. That's the ultimate goal, right? To restore balance and promote health.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive.
Yes.
We've gone deep into this world of molecular signaling.
Yeah.
And it's clearly so crucial for all of us, for our health.
Absolutely.
What stands out to you the most from all of this?
I think for me what's most fascinating is the fact that these signaling pathways are always evolving. They're constantly adapting to new challenges. So it's like this dynamic, ever-changing landscape.
It makes you wonder what other secrets are hidden in there, right?
Absolutely.
And how we can use that knowledge to improve, everyone's health.
That's the exciting part. There's so much more to discover.
Well, thanks for joining us on this incredible journey.
You're welcome.
Through the world of TNF signaling.
It's been fun.
We hope you enjoyed the deep dive.